Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so item 1 is an application at the former Clovelly Rest Home, 67 to 69 Clifton Drive. So this is the site edge red here, north side of Clifton Drive. This is Kingsway Court at the back. It's a series of apartment blocks here and to the sides of the building, and Woodlands Road runs up here to the east. So the application is to change the use of the former care home building and a bungalow at the rear of the site to provide 11 supported living apartments within use class C3B, which includes uses for the provision of care and associated external alterations and car parking. So this is just an aerial view showing the context. This site at the back here, there's a separate planning permission for a 2, 3 and 3 story extension at the back for 9 apartments on this site. These are existing apartments on Kingsway Court, 3 story apartments on Belvedere Court, and then apartment blocks to either side of the existing building. There's an existing access off Kingsway Court to the back of the building, which opens onto this car park. So this is the frontage onto Clifton Drive, so quite a typical St Anne's building with smaller apartment blocks on either side. You can see this front boundary wall with pedestrian access only, and then a small garden behind. This is at the rear of the building, so you've got this fire escape staircase at the side, this blue, both of which are being removed as part of the scheme, and then this conservatory that sits between these protruding gables, which is to be replaced with an extension. You can see that there's quite a close relationship with the apartment block to the east here in terms of mutual overlooking. So there's windows in this side as well as on the adjacent apartment block. So this is what's referred to as the bungalow at the back. This is Clovelly Cottage that's referred to in the report. So the application also includes the conversion of this existing bungalow to a separate self-contained flat, as well as the 10 within the main building, and this is the existing access of Kingsway Court. So in terms of the established use, submitted plans for previous applications indicate that the property was previously used as an 18-bed elderly persons care home. That's a use that falls within Class C2 for residential institutions. There's been 3 previous planning applications for the redevelopment of this site, which allowed the demolition of the existing building and the erection of 3-story blocks of 9 apartments in its place. The latest of these remains extant at present. So the proposed use is for 11 self-contained supported living apartments, 10 within the main building and 1 within the rear bungalow. These are to be provided for adults with learning disabilities, autism, mental health and or physical disabilities within use class C3B. And the definition of that is use as a dwelling house by not more than 6 residents living together as a single household where care is provided for residents. And then the definition of care means personal care for people in need of such care by reason of old age, disablement, past or present dependence on alcohol or drugs, or past or present mental disorder. And then separately within C2, which isn't proposed in this case. So we've had some representations from surrounding residents which largely raised queries regarding the nature of the use and how it was going to operate. So the applicant has provided responses which I've summarised in this slide here. The site is to be run by Halo Housing Association, who are a registered provider of social housing, so effectively they will be the landlord. And the care will be provided by an LCC approved care provider from their list, and it'll be occupied by residents who require specialist services or support to enable them to live or adjust to living independently within the community. Residents won't be referred because of a drug or alcohol dependency issue, and they'll be vetted to ensure that that isn't a problem. The overwhelming kind of the overarching concept here is that these residents are capable of having a degree of independent living, but that they require support with their everyday needs in order to live, shopping, paying bills, those types of everyday tasks that they need assistance with. It's also been clarified that each tenant will have an individual tenancy, so it'll be one tenant per flat, so a maximum of 11 occupiers at the site overall, and each apartment is self-contained. It's not a house in multiple occupation. Occupants will always be adults, minimum age of 18, both male and female, and because the scheme's commissioned by Lancashire County Council, all residents will be certainly from the Lancashire area and likely from the Fylde coast. In terms of staffing, the applicant has estimated that these will vary because of the needs of the residents. So depending on their care needs, staffing levels will vary up or down depending on the amount of care and support that each resident needs. So it isn't possible to put an exact figure on it until the identity of the occupiers is known. On average, though, the applicant estimates that there'll be approximately 6 staff during the day and 1 at night, which would be a waking night rather than sleeping at the site. Each tenant would receive between 7 and 30 hours of support a week, depending on their individual needs, and a manager would also be available during the day. They will be based at multiple sites. So I've just shown this slide to show the internal layout. As I mentioned, each apartment is self-contained. It's got its own bathroom, kitchen, living space. So these are effectively apartments in the standard guise that you would expect for market housing, but they will not be available to the open market. I've just mentioned here that each of these apartments would meet the nationally described space standard, although there's no specific policy requirement for that, just to emphasise the point that they are self-contained separate apartments and this is not a house in multiple occupation. The concept is independent living with care rather than a care home within C2, although that is the established use of the building. Externally, minimal changes, but what it does include is the introduction of this access from Clifton Drive. So there'll be a new vehicle access in here, this turning area at the front to allow vehicles to enter and exit in forward gear, and a total of 9 car parking spaces. So at the moment parking is limited to this area at the rear. That will be retained for 4 spaces and 5 additional spaces provided at the front. And then this building will be demolished and a new landscape garden area created to the rear. In terms of the building itself, I've highlighted all the new or replacement openings that are proposed here. So 2 windows are to be replaced with doors. There's 3 additional windows at the back. The existing conservatory has been replaced with this extension on substantially the same footprint. The external staircase at the side has been removed and the doorways that opened onto that staircase have been replaced with windows. So all the existing spacing distances with neighbouring occupiers are maintained. So just to run through some of the main issues. The site's an accessible location within the settlement boundary, close to public transport, local shops and services on Woodlands Road, so it's suitable for housing in accordance with the policies in the local plan. Although it involves the provision of care, it's intended to support independent living rather than being a care home, although that is the established use, and that fallback position must be given consideration in comparison to the new use. There's a condition imposed that restricts the nature of the proposed use to what the applicant has specified in their application. There's 2 real reasons for that. The first is to make sure that it operates in the way that they've set out that it will, and secondly to prevent future changes or conversion to market housing through permitted development rights, because we are taking a different stance on contributions than we normally would do because of the nature of the use. So in terms of character and appearance, it retains the existing building within that street scene that makes a positive contribution to the area rather than demolishing it. Very minor external alterations that don't detract from its character. The nature of the use is one that's inherently residential in character, so future occupiers will expect to experience the same standard of amenity as the surrounding market housing, albeit there will be some staff comings and goings. They're limited in number. I mentioned 6 staff during the day, and there will be 1 staff member present at night. But that's likely to be much less intensive than the established use as an 18-bedroom care home in terms of staff comings and goings. And the dominant noise source in the area is likely to be passing road traffic on Clifton Drive. Surrounding uses are characterised by apartment blocks, so in that respect, in introducing a block of 11 apartments within that concept will be compatible with those uses. Spacing distances and overlooking distances between windows are as existing and would not be altered. So there would be no further adverse impacts on surrounding residents. In terms of highways, the new access from Clifton Drive allows an increase in parking provision at the site. So at the moment there's a maximum of 4 spaces that'll increase to 9, and there's a turning area provided to ensure a safe and suitable means of access onto Clifton Drive. Visits by staff will be spread throughout the day. Different care needs for different occupiers, comings and goings throughout a staggered shift pattern throughout the day. And the site's accessible by various different transport modes, and there's no objections from the Highway Authority. So in terms of infrastructure contributions, on the basis that this scheme would not be available to the open market, it's a bespoke supported housing scheme that's delivered by a registered provider, albeit that care need takes it outside the definition of affordable housing. There is an exemption within the framework for affordable home ownership that refers to specialist accommodation for a group of people with specific needs. So it's our view that in combination with the fact it won't be available to the open market, it's being delivered by a registered provider, and there's this element of there is this specialist accommodation for a group of people with specific needs, that an affordable housing contribution isn't required in this instance. However, occupiers of the dwellings will still require access to open space and primary care in the same way that any other housing scheme would, and so the resolution is to grant planning permission subject to a Section 106 agreement to secure those contributions towards open space.
Primary care. With the Chairman and Vice Chairman with that resolution.
Yeah, so that's the recommendation.
Right, thank you, Matthew. Open to debate. Gary?
Thank you. It's just really, I think, a clarification. I think I understand it, but I just want to be certain. Halfway down page 7, we talk about the 11 self-contained one-bed apartment, and the next paragraph defines uses of dwelling house by not more than 6 residents living together. Am I correct in thinking that this is effectively 11 dwelling houses, each of which has less than 6 because each is only 1?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Clear. Thank you. Vice Chairman?
Yeah, I want to basically, I think there are many positive elements with this proposed scheme. This is a substantial house, it's a significant building in terms of the street scene on Clifton Drive, but it has been empty for some time and it is becoming derelict. So to bring a fine building back into use and repurposing it in this way is something, in my view, to be commended. One of the things that I'm looking at is in terms of what effect and the perceptions of neighbours in terms of neighbourhood amenity and the impact that a change of use of a building can have on the neighbours and the local area. And one of the things I just want to sort of explore a little bit, Matthew, if this is okay, is picking out some specific points in terms of supervision. one, I think on page 14, there's a reference to nighttime supervision. And I think that key phrase, if required. The reason I raise this is that if you've got 11 people with different challenges, different problems that they're facing, some people might be very concerned that there could well be no nighttime supervision. So if potentially, and I know you can argue with a group of people in any building, there's always a potential for example, for falling out, etc., or an incident during the night. But there may be particular incidents that are related to some conflict within the group, etc. And resolving that, if there's nobody there overnight, and I want this to work, I'm looking at this in a positive light. I believe in independent living and promoting this approach within the community. I think it's the way forward. It's what we would all want. But I'm also very, very keen to ensure that if we're going to do this, that we provide, and it may not be a planning issue, and I can get clarification about this, but I want to be absolutely sure that there is a level of care that is commensurate with the need. Not just affordable care, but care that meets the needs, that is appropriate for, and I know this will be different for different people because of their particular conditions, disabilities, learning problems, mental health problems, etc. And there's a spectrum even within those groups. But I want to make sure that there is adequate supervision, one, because I think we should be looking after these people properly within these independent units, and that means proper support, proper supervision, but also in terms of reassuring the local community that if there was a particular incident or a problem, particularly overnight, that I would have been happier if there had been at least somebody there at all times.
Well, let's ask Matthew to respond to that.
Yeah, I'll come on to my other points afterwards.
I have sought to clarify this with the applicant in advance of the meeting, and they have told me that there will be somebody there every night, and that is now a requirement of LCC.
That's good.
So yes, there will be a permanent presence there overnight.
That's really good, because reading the report, I don't know if anybody else shared this, it was a bit of a concern that, you know, that there was nobody there to support these people within these units overnight, and that, you know, in terms of reassuring the local community as well. I mean, you know, the experience of these particular situations can be very positive, and I hope that this is. The next point I want to say is, and again, it might not be a planning consideration, but I'll throw it in anyway, is obviously the level of support will be appropriate to the nature and severity of the particular needs being displayed by individuals. And I just wondered, I just had this sort of thought afterwards when I was thinking about this, that for some of these people in these independent units, they're going to be, remember, by themselves. You know, one person in each unit, which in a way could potentially lead to isolation because they haven't got anybody else in that unit, they've got themselves. Now, for some of them, I would anticipate that they could well call upon some really good and effective family support. In other words, family members can be visiting, interacting with them, and if that's the case, for me, this is more likely to work because not only do they have the statutory support that is required, but that's actually supplemented by the additional support from their own family. The question is, what about those that are totally isolated from their family, can't call upon that, and therefore, in terms of their particular challenges, the statutory support is fairly low, just a few hours, and it's not augmented by family support, is that going to leave some people vulnerable? That's one. I've got one more point of this, but I'll
Let's
put that
get an
one
answer
in.
to the question.
I mean, ultimately, Chairman, that's really a social services issue, a social care issue, rather than a planning issue that we can have any control over. Certainly, there's no intention of excluding family members from visiting the home or anything like that, and there would be, I think, a level of parking provision, for example, that would cater for those types of visits. But I don't have any further information from the applicant how that would work, but it is.
So it's not really a planning issue.
No, I mean, it is entirely a social care issue rather than anything that affects the use of the building and the way it operates in planning terms.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I raised it in anticipation that I'm sure reading the report there would be other people who had similar concerns, and I think it's important for us to raise these issues, even if they don't particularly have a planning sort of
but there's no evidence
application.
that
No.
members of the family will be excluded.
The other point is that I think you probably covered this, because one of my concerns was that during the day that there would be enough people appropriately there physically in the building, should there be any particular conflict or incident, to resolve that. And I think you were saying there were at least 6 people, 7 people, whatever it is, in the building interacting and supporting people. Is that right, Matthew? Yes.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very much a case of it will be tailored to the individual needs of the person who's resident there. So some people will have kind of a lighter touch level of support, whereas others would need more. So that those staffing levels would vary according to the needs of the residents. But that figure of 6 is an average that the applicant has estimated based on the operation of other premises of a similar scale.
I'm satisfied with the answers, and I'm reassured. So I would be in a position to be able to support and forward this application.
You're moving approval.
I am moving approval, having had those reassurances which were concerning me.
You want to second that? Second it. No. Linda.
Yeah, I welcome this. I think it's very much needed. A lot of money is poured into this sort of activity, and I think what Matthew has said, that there will be 6 or 7 people in the daytime and there will be somebody at night. I'm more concerned that there is somebody at night for the people who are living independently. I mean, we have gone down the route of care in the community. A lot of what you find now is not care in the community, and I think this provides an ideal scenario where people are living independently but they've got somebody to rely on. So I very much welcome that. And you know, and a lot of money is poured into it. The one that I've just got, well, one concern was that there was enough parking, but I think we've been, because what it doesn't mention is any cleaning needs or things like that. I presume because it's independent living, you don't have things like the children's homes. There's often conflict with the community because there are people arriving, and some of those people are cleaners and what have you, and they're parking in the wrong place. I presume because it's independent living, these people are assessed and they can live without that sort of support.
Yeah, that's very much a distinction in the 2 uses in terms of the difference between a C2 use, which is a care home, and a C3B use, which is independent living with care, with support. So that's the distinction in planning views. And my impression is that the people or the staff who are visiting these people will help with the cleaning as well, and that there wouldn't necessarily be a separate kind of cleaning service coming in.
And the only other question, I saw that the LCC wanted a bike store for 11 bicycles. Is that, do you see that? Is that on there, or is it not?
There's a condition requiring the provision of a cycle store, which I would anticipate being used more by staff than
Say 11.
the residents. I think the LCC have probably just looked at this as a housing scheme, and that's where the figure of 11 cycle spaces comes from, but I don't anticipate.
Just imagine them all going out on their bikes.
In the absence of Tim, we'll move on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to support this as well. There is a need, as I said, there is a need for this sort of facility in areas, and you can understand how residents would be perhaps concerned without fully knowing the ins and outs of who's going to be there, but that can't be assessed until such a time as until somebody actually turns up. So I do have empathy with people in the area who perhaps are a bit worried. But given the LCC support and the level of staffing, the level of interaction that does occur, does seem to be available for any resident, it seems like a reasonably good scheme. Plus, I know the building. It was owned when it was the Clovelly Rest Home. It was owned by friends of mine, and I was in and out of that. And to see a building, because it's a beautiful building, it's a lovely, lovely building, and to see it historically be demolished wasn't nice. To see it brought back to life and a usable space for a good purpose is a really nice project. I support it.
In terms of impact on residents, I think we can all agree this is less intensive use of the site than the previous use of the restaurant. Anyone else wishing to speak? In that case, it has been moved and seconded for approval. Moved by the Vice Chairman and seconded by Stan. All in favour of approval, please show. Anyone against? That's clearly carried and unanimous. Can we move on to Freckleton? This shouldn't occupy us too long. Of course, it's only on this agenda because of the Parish Council's peculiar reason for refusal. Does someone want to move it? Do you want to?
Sorry, Chairman, can we just present this one because Jen's going to present this one? And
Oh right, where is she?
which is
I'll go and fetch
I think that last application passed a little quicker than anticipated. So we'll just get Jen.
If you recall, when we had the planning advisory session, this is one of the points they made for junior members of the planning department to start to present applications. And Jennifer has volunteered, she's done one before, so she's got to be encouraged.
Absolutely.
Simpson.
Sorry to disappoint.
Oh, you've got it all set up. Yes, it's just. Right, okay. Good.
So she's on her way, sorry.
She's on her way, yeah. So I'm just going to Who's presenting, James?
Rob.
I'm starting.
Yeah.
Hiya, morning.
Morning, Jennifer.
Good morning.
You explained to the committee that you volunteered
Yeah.
and you got the congratulations for doing that.
Thank you.
All yours.
Thank you. So we're looking at application 23136, sorry, which is a property along Summit Drive, which is in a residential area within the settlement of Freckleton, as we can see on the map. This is the application property, which is a semi-detached dormer bungalow. I don't know if it's clear from the images on the screen, sorry. But the property is in poor condition and is in need of some repair and general maintenance works. The wider area is residential with various types of bungalow type properties, but there's also a mix of two-storey and detached properties in the street scene. So if we move on to the proposals, the application is seeking to modernise the property, which includes an extension, a single-storey rear extension, which is modest in size and height. Oh, I'm sorry, I've gone really nervous. Can I just have a minute? Sorry. I didn't catch a breath. Sorry.
Just relax. Take it slow.
Thank you. I'm sorry about this.
You'll find him coming extremely patient.
We're all looking at the screens, aren't
I
we? So don't
know,
worry
it's
about
me.
it.
So the external alterations include the removal of a chimney and some bay windows, as well as the recladding of the front and rear dormers and the cladding of the entire external walls, which would also include the single-storey rear extension. The application is being presented today because Freckleton Parish Council have confirmed that whilst they support the majority of the proposals, they do object towards the rendering of the entire property, as it's considered that the render would stand out from all the other brick constructions in the area. If we just go back to the initial photograph, it's probably a good point to note here that the existing property does have some render on its front elevation, which means that the applicant could render this property without planning consent. These patches of render are a common feature on these these property types in the area. However, as we can see in the street scene, and regardless of the PD fallback position, there are render to other elevations on the surrounding properties. The application property doesn't hold any significant value in the street scene in terms of visual amenity, so it's considered that render at this particular site wouldn't cause any detrimental harm to the character of the property or wider street scene. So just to give you a quick overview of the considerations, the site is within a settlement where this type of development proposals are generally supported. The dwelling itself is not listed and it's not within a conservation area, and as I've said, it has limited design quality, so the proposed alterations and modernisation of the property is considered acceptable. The proposed use of render would obviously have some impact on the current appearance of the property, but for the reasons already given, it's considered that it wouldn't be so severe and that it would bring any harm to visual amenity within the street scene. But obviously, notwithstanding that, the applicant does have a realistic fallback position to render this property without planning consent. There are no neighbouring amenity concerns. The rear extension is modest, and its projection is in line with the requirements of the Householder SPD. Just to make you aware, we haven't advised the Parish Council of the PD fallback position, but that's just down to the timings of this committee meeting and the determination date of this application if for whatever reason there was a delay for the parish council to come back to us. We didn't want to have to make the applicant wait any longer for a decision. So that's it from me. The officer recommendation is to approve the application. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Jennifer. You see you got better.
Oh, sorry about that. Mind the lip.
Well, you can take this as a vote of confidence. I'd like to move approval because it was a very clear report. I don't think there are, I mean, I am perplexed that there are no neighbour objections to this because we're talking about a bit of rendering, and yet the parish council have objected on this basis and it's here before us because of that. I don't see that as a problem. I've seen other properties rendered. You brought that out in your report, so I'd like to move approval.
Someone second that?
Yeah, very happy to second that. The other thing I would suggest is that some constructive feedback's given to the parish council.
I was going to say we will remind the parish council that this is permitted development.
Yeah.
What I'll do, Council, I'll go back to the parish council and explain to them why we brought it to committee rather than coming back to them. As Jen said, it was more that to get it just fit with the time, and we got their letter the day before the agenda closed, so it was more logical to put it on this agenda than delay it to the June meeting.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you very much.
Moved by the Vice Chairman, seconded by Gavin. All in favour of approval? Thank you. You can
Thank
carry on
you.
with it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll go and get the golf.
J.R. Taylor's, item 3.
Okay, this is very personal, isn't it?
You can see your eye to eye.
So wiped my eyes this morning, see whether I've had a shave or not, Rob.
What a pen.
Oh.
Morning everyone. So next item on the agenda is item 3, which is, as we all know, J.R. Taylor's, and the scheme is also now incorporating the adjoining HSB bank building. Planning consent sought for external alteration, extension, change of use to form spa, bar restaurant, a VIP bar and rooftop bar. The presentation is very similar to one that I've presented to committee previously. I think we are all familiar with the site. It's in St Anne's Town Centre. The Garden Street and St Anne's Road East frontages are within a prime shopping frontage. It's within a conservation area, and the bank building is also a Grade 2 listed building. Just a few photos of the building itself. So the application site. So this is the application site, that's the bank building. This is a J.R. Taylor's building, and this is a J.R. Taylor's building which fronts onto Garden Street. The proposals incorporate demolition of the rear extension to the HSBC building, which is this feature here. And I've just also dropped in some photos to demonstrate the existing internal appearance of the bank building. There's some works that have already been carried out. There's been an internal strip of the bank features which were added into the building to facilitate the use as a banking facility. So just as a bit of background, this is the consent that was previously approved. Granted consent for a spa and bar restaurant, a 4-suite apart hotel and the rooftop bar. There was also external extension which incorporated the rooftop extension, a glazed corner feature with a roof, a turret feature on top, and we've also got balconies along Garden Street. There was quite a protracted debate at committee from recollection about windows. Through the condition discharge process, we agreed that the applicant would provide mock sash windows to the first floor. The works on the site under the the existing consent, they have actually started. I think it's been widely reported though that they've certainly slowed on site. My understanding of that is because of technical matters due to problems with construction, but also the purchase of the adjoining bank, and obviously the applicant determining really what to do with that building. So the proposal, the scheme largely remains the same as approved. Obviously we've got the amalgamation of the HSBC Bank into the scheme. The HSBC Bank will become the main entrance for the spa. Then the only other land use change is to do with the removal of the apart hotel scheme from within the J.R. Taylor's building and replacement with a VIP bar. So the uses in the new scheme overall are as bulleted in front of us. So we've got the basement, which is a spa, and the ground floor, which becomes a spa entrance as a restaurant, bar, ancillary spaces, including kitchen and toilets. To the first floor, we have the spa treatment rooms. There's an entertainment and dining space, as well as other ancillary spaces. The second floor will become the VIP bar, and then the third floor, the rooftop bar as approved. With regards to external alterations, the 2-storey extension to the back of the HSBC building is to be demolished, and that will be replaced by a basement extension with part 2, part single-storey extension above. The basement extension within the HSBC, that will be joined up to the spa, which is presently approved under the J.R. Taylor's building. The single story is a retractable roof. The scheme also incorporates removal of balconies from Garden Street, and the relocation of rooftop plant that was originally approved from J.R. Taylor's building. The scheme also incorporates a full window replacement. Those windows are based upon the details that have been approved by condition, which incorporate mock sliding sash. So this is just a quick snapshot really in terms of drawings that have been submitted. They have submitted other elevation drawings of Garden Street, but I thought I'd focus on these primarily because the other elevations haven't changed really from the approved consent. So the main change we can see on the rear elevation is this extension is being removed. We have a new brick wall which is going to be featured adjacent to the footpath. That will then become the outer skin to the single-storey extension on the back. We then have a 2-storey extension here that will be clad in similar material to the recladding of this building here, which is this elevation here. And then we have the relocation of the external plant and equipment compound area in that location. So this just is a section through the extension to show how the basement proposals relate to the wider development. So you can see here, this is the existing bank vault, and the extension is coming into this area, and then into this area, and this is the back street here. You can see that the extension single-storey element is open. This is a retractable roof. Yeah. So, some of the key issues. We're really only looking at what differs from the consented scheme, so in terms of land use and physical alterations to the building. Principal development, we obviously have national and local policies They encourage town centre uses, which a spa and bar obviously are. So from a principal perspective, that is supported. Design and heritage wise, again we have local and national plan policies which seek certainly high standards of design and conservation or enhancement of heritage assets such as conservation area and listed building in this circumstance. With regards to the J.R. Taylor building, the works to that building are minor in nature. Arguably will enhance the scheme, removal of the balconies along Garden Street, so that's going to reduce the clutter along that elevation. The HSBC building, there's no alteration whatsoever to the front elevation of the building other than the replacement of the existing front door. The other alterations, they obviously relate to the removal of the two-storey extension at the back and replacing it with a very similar extension. Internally, the works are very minor. They're literally stripping back the building internally, removing all the modern additions associated to the bank, and covering what traditional features are left, and obviously a little bit of paint and new flooring where needed. So from a design perspective, proposals are sympathetic not just to the building conservation area but also to the significance of the listed building. Amenity, obviously the introduction of a VIP bar, potential for noise escape from the building. That use though is no different to what we've previously looked at through the already approved scheme. Our environmental protection team have looked at the proposals and they're happy with the acoustic and odour assessments provided, but are suggesting that the hours of use restrictions that we imposed on the original scheme are replicated obviously in this new scheme. To make sure that this application runs as smoothly as possible, I've been speaking to the architect who's confirmed that they are due to go back on site at the beginning of June. So I'd like a little bit more time if possible to work with the applicant to try and minimise as many pre-commencement conditions as possible. So I'm working with them in terms of external materials, those kind of things. So the recommendation is to delegate the authority to head of planning, to grant planning permission, so I can continue that dialogue.
Good, thank you. Vice Chairman and the presumptuous.
This is a project we all recognise it's absolutely central to town centre regeneration in St Anne's. It also, has been and still is an iconic building. I know that word is overused, but it actually is appropriate in this context. It's obviously a listed building, the bank as well that has been incorporated into it. I'm actually pleased with the removal of the balconies because I think that is more consistent with the J.R. Taylors that we know as a heritage sort of building. But more than anything, it is very much key to the regeneration of the whole town, and I think is a huge statement because here you have this very large building which has been vacant since 2016, something like that. I think
7 years.
Yeah, exactly. So and one of the greatest negatives in any town centre are empty buildings without any prospect of development that then become derelict, then become vandalised, and then it sort of project a negativity right through the town centre. So the fact that we have this particular application, which I think enhances the previous, because incorporating that quite beautiful sort of entrance to it's my old bank, the HSBC. I'm sad that the bank has gone, but I have to tell you that on a personal level, if I looked at how this is now being brought in and incorporated into the whole scheme, I'm delighted because it is quite a beautiful entrance and very fitting to enter the spa. So repurposing all that space in the town centre is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to take the opportunity to say this here, that they're back on site and in June. And if we approve this, and I will move approval of this, my message would be to the developers, please work at pace to try and restore this fantastic project, that I would love to see it sooner rather than later, and I just want to leave it there. But I think it's a fantastic proposition, very much town centre use policy-wise led as well, so very appropriate. And the investment and the work on this fantastic site is much to be applauded. So I would like to move approval.
I appreciate your great presentation. Gavin?
Thank you. As Ward Councillor, I echo everything that the Vice Chairman just said there. It was great concern, obviously, when J.R. Taylor's and when the bank shut down, to see it brought back into use. People are very enthusiastic about this, and people ask me on a regular basis, when's it going to happen? When can we go and drink in the rooftop bar, etc., etc. So, yeah, the sooner the better, which is said, if we can do things well. I noted Richard used the term iconic building. I completely agree. And I noted the Town Council's observations. They talked about traditional features being retained, and they drew out particularly the mosaic tiles in the entrance to the fourth bank. If it's at all possible, and obviously don't want this to be turned into can we include the clock tower on that, please? People use that clock tower. At the moment, we know it's right twice a day. It would be lovely to think that it could be brought back into use as a clock and be right on the time. If it's possible, I say absolutely would want it to become a.
Yeah, I followed up that town council comment with the applicant with regards to the mosaic tiles, and because I can't recall mosaic tile being within the bank. Now, when the applicant has been obviously going through and doing the soft strip, they haven't found anything that's been covered up either. But in terms of works internally, like I said, they have stripped out all the modern additions that the bank put in, the reinstating what has been covered up. I'll speak to them about the clock. Like you say, it's that pinnacle of our town centre. Everybody sees it when you walk into the town.
If it's not possible to use it as a clock, maybe the suggestion that the clock faces are removed and something suitable. I don't know.
It's only been recently though that it has been working, isn't it?
Yeah, as I say, at the moment it's
Okay.
And on that basis, more than happy to second the recommendation the Vice Chairman made. Thanks for that, Rob.
So it's been moved for approval by the Vice Chairman, seconded by Gavin Harrison. All in favour, please show. Those against? Clearly carried, unanimous. As I indicated at the beginning of the meeting, we diverged from the agenda in terms of, before we deal with item 4, Rosica, we have to have the exempt item, and the exempt item means that members of the public will have to be excluded, and I'll just read the appropriate words. Members are invited to consider passing a resolution concerning the exclusion of the public from the meeting in accordance with the provisions of section 100A/4 of the Local Government Act 1972, on the grounds that the business to be discussed is exempt. Information is defined under paragraph 5, information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege to be maintained in legal proceedings. So on that, can I ask members of the public to leave the room? All in favour of that resolution?
Chairman, can I ask what is in this? I know there's a legal opinion in it, but what else is not in the conclusion? Is it simply a legal opinion?
Yes, Chairman, it is that legal opinion.
It's not.
We're not going to be contradictory to the legal opinion.
No.
So the issue will be, Chair.
We don't need to dwell on that. Can I ask
We're invited to debate it, Chairman. I don't know if anybody else has got an opinion on that.
Well, you've got a chance to your question.
I got it, yeah.
Can I ask members of the public to vacate the room? And when we deal with item 4, we will ask you to return.
Because I didn't quite get the vote that went before.
No.
All in favour, let's repeat it, all in favour of the exclusion as an exempt item. All, please show. No alternative because it's a legal directive. Those against? Those abstain? So, okay, thank you. Can you be shown somewhere where?
Yeah.
I just don't understand. I'm sorry.
It's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? Because if you go through the reasons for excluding the public while the public are here, they then hear why they things that they're not supposed to hear, if you like. So it's a tricky one, I think.
So when you have a legal directive,
It's not a directive though, is it? It's a legal opinion from the applicant's side.
we won't dwell on semantics.
Well, we might. Sorry.
Somebody might.
Sorry, Chair.
So this
You're going
is,
to indulge me.
I believe you're standing down. Is it your last meeting?
Mm.
Make the best.
You not press the button. Sorry, Chairman, I just need to. Apparently, I need to just do something with this. I need to do that.
we won't be replaying it.
Well, hopefully that.
No. Logically.
Thank you, Chair. So, I think it was the meeting before last, wasn't it? So, I brought the same presentation again. I don't intend to go into the same level of detail. I don't think there's any new members here that didn't see the previous presentation. So,
No, you didn't.
sorry, I didn't see behind the screen. Right, okay, I'll certainly go through the proposals in detail. So yeah, so the application is it's an outline application with access applied for and all of the matters reserved for a residential development of up to 52 dwellings. The access is proposed off Wildings Lane, which is this route along here. Just for a bit of context, that's the Booth supermarket. This development that you can see here, that's the present Queensway development that's under construction. So in terms of context, I've put this slide together just to show how the application site relates to the approved housing development at Queensway. So you've got the housing layout there, the application site here in red, and then the housing development with the indigo line. Just a few photos. I haven't been to site for a while, so I'm not sure how up to date they are. But these are obviously from Wildings Lane. Top two just immediately outside the site. You can see here the care home in the background. These two are on Wildings Lane itself, so you can see that the change in surfacing from where it's a formal road moving into bridle path. Then I've just got some aerials just from various compass points just to demonstrate the site appearance as it was then on Google Earth. So this one's just from the west, from the north, and these photographs just illustrate the type of structures which are on the site at the moment. So there's stable structures here. This bungalow here will also be demolished as part of the development. That's just the view from the east. So the development proposals, the applicant has provided a layout, but that is only for indicative purposes, bearing in mind that it's an outline application just for access. So the access details that we provided, they indicate the access along Wildings Lane with a continuation into the application site and then a right-hand turn into the main body of the development. This offshoot here, that's proposed to be a shared footpath and cycle path. The care home is under construction. It might actually be part occupied now, I'm not sure. But that care home has temporary use of Wildings Lane for access. That was approved by committee back in 2019, I believe. The care home is also responsible for off-site highway works, which will obviously include the improvements to Wildings Lane, and that includes a provision of a footpath link, and also the reprioritisation of Wildings Lane, so that Wildings Lane then continues around into Jubilee Lane, and you take a left-hand turn to continue along Wildings Lane towards the application site. The access road design itself, there is an unknown quantity at the moment in terms of a slither of land ownership, which is the peach coloured. Because of that unknown land ownership, the applicant is provided with two access road options. So option one, which as Mark referred to, is the more favoured option from the Highway Authority. So that assumes that this peach land that can be developed, and it provides for a simple continuation of Wildings Lane with footpaths both side of Wildings Lane into the application site. Option two is more complicated. It assumes that peach land can't be developed, so introduces, widens Wildings Lane, the application site, through the provision of this footpath. It then reduces a carriageway width to a pinch point because of that land ownership issue and the ownership of the neighbouring house, and then deals with that pinch point through priority giveaway allowances. Overnight I've received 4 objections, which obviously it's too late to incorporate into the late observations, so I'm giving you a brief synopsis of what they are in the presentation. They are all relative to highway grounds, primarily looking at Jubilee Way becoming a rat run. So as opposed to the presumption that all vehicles from the application site go along Wildings Lane to the junction of Hayhouses Lane, there is an offer for a left-hand turn before you get to that junction to continue along Jubilee Lane and then join Hayhouses Lane further down. Residents have suggested a number of different options available. One includes a left-hand turn from Wildings Lane into Jubilee Lane. Another includes the closure of Wildings Lane to the care home and the new housing development. Now that option, very similar to what's envisaged for the development anyway. So in time, whilst the care home has temporary access along Wildings Lane, once the access through the wider housing estate becomes available, then there will be a notion for the care home to close off Wildings Lane at this point here, which means that the only new development that will be accessible along Wildings Lane will be this application site that we're determining today. All other housing, care home will be accessed via to the north from Kilnhouse Lane and Hayhouses Lane junction. We've also been criticised for not consulting as many residents as necessary. I have double checked this morning and we have consulted everybody along Wildings Lane. We've consulted everybody that, as we should do, attached to the red edge of the application site. We've done press notices, we've done site notices. So from that perspective, we've certainly fulfilled what we need to do in terms of consultation. I think this has reared its head through social media recently. So moving on to the main issues, principle-wise, from a local plan position, the site is allocated for housing. It meets the required dwellings per hectare, so from a local plan perspective, principle of housing is supported. It obviously lies in St Anne's, whereby we have a neighbourhood plan. There is an anomaly in that neighbourhood plan which allocates the site for countryside. So obviously there is a contradiction, if you will, between both policy positions. In that circumstance, though, our national planning practice guidance that refers us to neighbourhood planning guidance and states that the neighbourhood plan should support the delivery of strategic policies set out in that plan. By that notion, we mean that if there's a housing allocation within the local plan, then that should be replicated within the neighbourhood plan. You shouldn't, if you will, allocate land for alternative means, such as countryside in this example. So notwithstanding the neighbourhood plan position, because of the local plan allocation for housing, then the principle of development is in accordance with our development plan. Highways wise, again, so we went through this in detail last time, but importantly though, the Highway Authority haven't raised objection to the scheme. Their preference out of the 2 access options is for option 1 to come forward in favour of option 2, but importantly they do still support option 2 as a reasonable means of accessing the site. Residential amenity and ecology wise, and indeed drainage on the next slide, those are technical matters. There were issues throughout the assessment of the planning application which have been resolved, particularly from an ecology perspective, and on that basis we are recommending approval of the scheme, subject to the viability discussion that we had earlier.
Thank you. Open to debate. Maureen.
Mr. Chairman, on the presentation, the care home that's just been built, was that tiled? Did that need that doing?
I'm not sure, to be honest
Sure
with you.
the land was similar.
I would have thought so. I mean, it's two-storey. A lot of the other development on Queensway has been piled, been preloaded. Yeah.
Good question. Anyone else? Councillor Lowtey.
Chairman, I would ask you to indulge me this morning and allow me to speak uninterrupted. After 24 years on this committee.
I'll try.
Thank you. After 24 years on this committee, I think I know a little of what I'm talking about, even if you don't think so.
The first interruption is remembering Mowbray.
I'll address something later, Chair. That's another application a long, long time ago. Not my fault, I have to add. Secondly, so a few quotes from the local plan, okay? Incorporating the partial review. At 4.1, to create sustainable communities. 2, to maintain, improve and enhance the environment. 3, make services accessible. 5, to develop socially cohesive, safe, diverse and healthy communities. 4.4, presumption in favour of sustainable development. Strategic objective 1, create sustainable communities within strategic locations. Lots about climate change, minimising private transport. Importantly, developer contributions will be used to mitigate the impacts on the surrounding area. This is not my area. This is an area in Fylde. It's not personal to me. It's part of Falborough, so I am concerned. To meet specific housing needs of all sections of the community. Affordable, right-sized dwelling types. I'm just picking out words. Improving housing choice. I could go on and on. Modal shift away from car use. I think this does.
I would prefer if you did, sorry for the second intervention, if you would concentrate on aspects of policy within the report.
Yeah, these are pertinent. This is our local plan, ours. We agreed
These
it.
issues were rehearsed when
We agreed
adopted
it all, not long ago. We agreed it all. It's part of what this is set against, I hope, isn't it? Absolutely wrong. Just keep nodding. If you haven't read it, then please do. Someone wrote it with all these good intentions in mind. On page 128, viability is spoken about, but it talks about lower levels, not abandoning this requirement altogether. The need for affordable housing, particularly in Livingston towns, is well documented in this document and in lots of housing documents, which we don't seem to have any report from housing.
More was at pains to emphasise
I
that our
accept.
policy, I'm sorry, Councillor Murphy, that our policy included the provision, delivery of affordable housing, unless, and this is the policy, unless viability prevented the delivery.
Chairman, I'm quoting. Sorry, will you just let me? You'll disagree with me. I know you will. I know you will. Just let me. Uninterrupted. Just for once. Just once. In the last, how many years have you been chairman?
40.
Yeah.
Chairman. No, you haven't.
And I've sat here every day for 40 years.
I've enjoyed it.
Okay. So I accept that this site was given permission in 2017. So the fact that the site is in, I totally accept that. But that was subject to satisfactory Section 106 contributions. I realise that is now defunct because it's out of date, and it's not what we're talking about. But why are we now talking about an increase in the number of dwellings with the probability, or at very least possibility, of no contributions whatsoever? In 2017, we were talking about subject to satisfactory Section 106 contributions. I know not everyone believes in the phrase sustainability, or climate change for that matter, but the approval or not of this development surely hinges on that very thing, sustainability. LCC Education have said in their comments that if contributions are not forthcoming, it changes their comments to an objection, as the development would be considered unsustainable. If the development doesn't contribute to the shortfall, who will? Is a very legitimate question, asked not by me, but by LCC Education. NHS CCG make very similar comments and would invoke an objection should contributions not be made. It's very clear that the local community are very worried about the highway's impact and the loss of significant countryside. St Anne's Parish Council share their concerns and object on various sound grounds. It is a non-strategic housing allocation. I'm not sure the impact of that. I need to ask that question. So this development is not viable for the developers to achieve their level of profit. But is it viable to the local community? The community of Lytham St Anne's, Balborough Council, Lancashire County Council? Because as several consultees comment, if the development does not provide what makes the development sustainable, who will? And who will provide the social housing and the public open space and places for children to play and the travel plan? These costs presumably all fall on the local community. I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning writing this, so I'm
We
going
may
to
be
say.
still here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
So, not that long. So, to viability. The only information we have is about sheet piling or not. All other matters are accepted by Kepi Massey, our consultants, but we don't know what they are except ground conditions. What else is put forward, and why was this apparently not an issue with the previous application? I accept that costs of various things have gone up, but the ground conditions must surely be the same, and costs may have gone up, but then so have the costs of properties. We're told that should the sheet piling not be necessary, then the 378,000 released would not enable any affordable dwellings on this site. I find that unbelievable. But even accepting off-site construction, what would we end up with? Maybe 3 or 4 dwellings, and where would they be? I find this totally unacceptable. This site is quite obviously unsustainable and not viable to the local community. It breaches local plan policies and does not fit the sustainable development which should be approved without delay criteria. I don't expect to get anywhere this morning. The committee, the decision makers have been told that this should go forward. But I have to share my opinion and extreme concern, and I will not be voting for this. I'm very firmly against. I'll listen to the debate. But lastly, let me tell you that appeals are not always bad. There is an estate in Westham, not the one mentioned by the chairman, of 112 houses won on appeal. It was on land that needed considerable piling. It contains 40% affordable housing. That appeal, I went to the site with the inspector, who asked me what would make it acceptable. I told her that the junction of the Kirkham and Westerly bypass, which would serve the development, was extremely dangerous and needed a roundabout. Also, a pedestrian crossing was needed to provide access to the schools and the recreation ground on the other side of the development. That appeal was granted on the proviso that a roundabout was provided and also a pedestrian crossing installed. We now have those things. It was piled. It provided 40% affordable housing. A considerable amount was given to improve public open space as well as its own play area. Presumably, that developer also made the desired profit. No costs to this authority were awarded. That is what sustainable development should look like and what a local plan and the planning committee should be striving for. That's me done.
Thank you. Any other comments to be made? Councillor.
Well, I totally support Linda in the comments you made. Sustainability is extremely important in relation to any development. It's there to protect existing residents. And I think we should absolutely make sure that sustainability is in place in every application. And I do believe that that isn't always the case. And you know, this is my last meeting. I'm making that bit because I do believe it's important. And affordable housing is important. It's very, very important in Midlands and Downs. And there isn't any provided here. Now, we have debated that issue. We've been told it's not possible, but we should be providing housing in another place within the area, and we should be finding a way to do so. So I don't need to say any more other than I totally support Linda and the comments that she's made.
Any other comments made?
I just want to say that, you know, thank you to Councillor Multy for that presentation, and in some ways that's what the committee is about. It's about being able to express your opinion on the evidence that we have in front of us, and therefore it shouldn't come as any great surprise to the public or anybody else witnessing this that there are opinions that are at variance sometimes with each other, because what we all fundamentally try to do is behave with integrity, look at the evidence, listen to the officer's recommendations, look at the report, listen to the other opinions within the debate within this committee, which, as the chair has rightfully said, was recently applauded for the ability in which this committee has exercised its responsibilities and the mechanisms that we've been using, exemplary. And I think, you know, we may not all come to the same conclusions, and nobody should be upset or offended at that, because we're looking at the same sort of evidence, but sometimes, particularly when the advice is fairly convincing in terms of, you know, planning officers, legal advice, etc., how we should look at this, we have a freedom to be able to say what we think and vote accordingly. And Councillor Multy, I've always respected your right to do that, and that's on the record. But it is also our right and our, you know, within our sort of gift, if you like, as members of the planning committee. And we don't always go with officer recommendations or advice lightly. We don't always go with advice to say that's because everything is wonderful and hunky-dory, because clearly sometimes it isn't. we have a duty of responsibility to look at this evidence and come to a conclusion on planning grounds. And we also have a duty of responsibility to act responsibility in the light of advice. One of those is balancing up some of the issues that you've raised, Linda, but also what are the risks here of going down a road where it is likely to go to appeal, and what are the risks there in terms of determining that appeal. And clearly the advice here is that there could be the potential. You're right to say that this doesn't happen always, that sometimes appeals are won, you know, and therefore benefits are made. And again, it's our responsibility to weigh up all these factors and come to a conclusion. I can't share your views on this, but I respect them.
Any other comment? Gavin?
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the application we've got before us, outline planning permission is sought with matters applied relating to access only. And I think I agree with everything the Vice Chairman just said. What Linda, Liz, what you said, completely agree with. But for this particular application, I just don't see that those matters are applicable. I think it's a discussion, a fight, if there needs to be a fight for another occasion. But based on planning access only, as much as I might like, I can't not support that.
Yeah, I think the sentiment comes out clearly.
Chairman, can I just ask
No,
then?
Linda.
Sorry, can I just ask, is if we accept no contributions at this stage, that cannot be reintroduced later, am I right?
Yes, I mean, there's a 106
Yes.
agreement
any
attached,
yeah.
so that's going to require the applicant to demonstrate whether or not the sheet pile is necessary. If it transpires that it isn't necessary, then the money that would have been apportioned to those costs, the £378,000, that will be provided by the applicant and contribute towards affordable housing in the first instance. So there is that caveat within the legal agreement, but we can't revisit the contribution amounts in its entirety, such as education, POS, those kind of things at a later date.
But it was, we mentioned earlier, we wanted that condition taken up. Do you agree? It needs to be done. Is it simply okay?
Chairman, I think in terms of I don't think anyone's moved approval yet, but I think if someone were to move approval and make it clear that that if there is that money available, that it is used for affordable housing, and that is this committee's priority, then that would be sufficient, and we would make sure that that was reflected in the minutes and obviously followed through into the warrant.
Well, in that case, I will move approval from the chair.
With that provision, yes.
Was that included?
That includes.
And I will second that.
Just one question at the end of the LCC education. It says, furthermore, if plan application is approved without the requirement education contribution, LCC would request that the local planning authority, that's us, yeah, confirm how the shortfall of school places resulting from the development will be addressed. How will it be addressed?
So, Chairman, if I may through you, it would have to be addressed with the local education authority. They would have to meet that cost. There are a number of authorities, I think, in the past, I don't know if it's still the case, who have not signed up to making contributions to LCC with the contributions of not just for education, but for many different issues. They have written to me about a number of applications where viability has meant that it's not been possible to make contributions from the developer, and on each one I've written back to them and advised them that the guidance is, as it is nationally, and this is a contribution that is sought to assist, but the primary duty, the legislative duty, is with the Education Authority to provide the education.
So basically, that's just like a nonsense statement from, isn't it?
I mean, it clearly makes the position, sorry for you, Joe, it clearly makes the position that they feel that this is a very important matter from their point of view, but obviously they are just looking at their one issue, education, and how that will be delivered. The challenge that is always presented to this and any other planning committee is that it's the balance of all competing issues, including the delivery of affordable housing. The point that I've had to make back to the Education Authority with the national planning guidance is that where it's not viable, then effectively it can't come in.
Any other speakers? In that case, it's been moved for approval by the chairman and vice chairman. All in favour, please show. Very counting, Bob. Those against?
Can I have my vote recorded as against, please?
Quite happy for that to happen. 4 against, clearly carried. Thank you.
So that, I think, then just brings us to the information item on the appeals, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got a report on the latest appeals. We note that report. That concludes the meeting. I cannot simply say I'll try again. Those who are standing for re-election, I hope you're successful, good luck. Those who aren't, can I just thank you for your contributions you made over many years.
Many, longer than some. Been a long time.
And as Vice Chair, I'd like to endorse those comments.
Yeah.